Welcome to this edition of Journals of Spiritual Discovery, brought to you by spiritualteachers.org. I'm your host, Sean Nevins. Hello, and welcome again to this month's edition of Journals of Spiritual Discovery. I've got two short announcements before we get started. First, I want to let you know that TAT's November virtual retreat is now open for registration. Go to tatfoundation.org and you'll see a banner for the event. The theme is the relative and the absolute, and as usual, there'll be a mix of small group workshops, panel discussions, talks, and this time there'll be some interviews. As always, it's a sincere and potentially life-changing weekend that I recommend every time it comes around. I'm also happy to announce that Art Ticknor, who's my guest this month, has a new book. It's called Sense of Self, and it's available on Amazon or through the bookseller of your choice. This is Art's third book, and it offers a sampling of bite-sized essays, discussions with seekers, and thought-provoking aphorisms. I highly recommend it, especially as a great pairing with this month's interview with Art. And as always, Art offers up a profound and thoughtful commentary on the spiritual path. I have video available this month as well, so if you're watching this on YouTube, yes, there'll be video in just a moment. And if you'd like to check that out, you can get the link on the podcast page. Just go to spiritualteachers.org and look for the link to the podcast. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy. Well, hi, Art. It's good to see you, and thanks for agreeing to do this interview.
This is breaking my long tradition of wanting to avoid Zoom at all possible costs.
I do appreciate the significance of this.
Yeah.
I do, because you've been at the last 2 or 3 TAT Foundation events without video. You've dialed into those on the phone.
It was like a ghostly presence there.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. So, again, thank you for doing this. You and I talked briefly before we started recording that it had been that you'd done an interview on Conscious TV in 2012, and I definitely want to point people towards that interview to get more of the story of your enlightenment, the story of your search. Ian did a really nice job on that interview.
Yeah, he did an excellent job.
And then I'll also point people towards the film Closer Than Close, where there's a segment where I and a friend interviewed you. That dates back to 2006, I think. So it's been a while, and I was really hoping to explore and see if anything's new with you over the past 8 years since that Conscious TV interview. And perhaps delve a little deeper into some things that were touched upon in that interview.
I think I've definitely mellowed in that time, Sean.
Well, I'll use that as a segue into a question about confrontation.
Uh-huh.
And confrontation, which sometimes people refer to as group inquiry or group self-inquiry. Mm-hmm. Whenever your name comes up in a conversation and among the TAT Foundation folks, it's generally connected to confrontation. Yeah. And how you are considered a master of confrontation or masterful at confrontation.
I've had a lot of practice.
And I wanted to first just clarify for people who aren't familiar with the term, what is confrontation?
So can I tell a little bit story about you?
Absolutely.
Okay. I remember a time when we had a confrontation session going on at a TAT meeting back on the Richard Rose farm. And after that meeting, I got a note from you in the mail saying it's not right to confront somebody who's depressed. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that.
And so I think I've made that mistake more than once. And so to me, I get enthusiastic about asking people questions and getting their responses. It's like it's something I'm just curious about other people's mentalities, and I like to do it, but I get wound up, and people lots of times think I'm angry or something like that. It's not that. I just get excited about doing it. So probably that hasn't changed much in people. So I'm still excited about it. When people will mesh gears with me, I could just keep on indefinitely.
Mm-hmm.
But basically,
go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, I was going to say, you asked me about what is confrontation, and to me, it's basically what I encourage people to do is either talk about their complaints or talk about what's on their mind that the mind is chewing on, what's some problem it's trying to solve. And to me, that gives a lot of clues about possible questions that could help somebody get more mental clarity, what's going on with themselves.
So, things that a person, not that this would have ever happened to me, of course, but a person might chew on what somebody said about them during the day.
Sure.
And maybe that comment hurt, or they wish that they had responded differently to that comment. Is that, on one sense, I might say, well, that's not a particularly spiritual question.
Yeah.
So I ask about who I am. Is that a legitimate topic for confrontation?
Yeah. So one of my so I think in general, the women I've worked with are more specific about their complaints and their problems and things like that, whereas the guys tend to be more abstract. And I think it's much easier if somebody gets down into details about what's going on in their own mind. It's easier to help those people get some more clarity on what's going on. So yeah, I think, so things like psychological complaints and stuff like that, I think that's all valid material to work with.
And the point of working with that sort of material is, I mean, in one sense, I see that if I see what's at the root of my irritations with other people, let's say, that perhaps frees me a little bit from external influence. But beyond that, is there a point to delving into that kind of psychological material?
Yeah, so based on my experience, what hangs us up from knowing the truth about what we are? Well, why would anybody want to know the truth about what they are, right? So I always have to keep backing up until I get to some starting point. But so when I met Richard Rose, I'd been going through a period for maybe half a dozen years of having the conviction that I had enough of everything that I should have been happy, but there was something missing and I didn't have a clue what it was. I didn't know what I was looking for. I didn't know where to look for it. But everything I could conceive of, I would think, no, I know that isn't going to do it. No, I know that isn't going to do it. This process would hit me strongly, maybe a couple times a year. And the way I talked to myself about it is that it was an identity crisis. Although to me, in retrospect, I don't know how I knew that because I didn't know I was looking for my identity. But so from my experience, what the problem of not knowing ourselves is that we have a lot of beliefs about what we are, and the beliefs are the cause of existential suffering. So the belief that I'm a person, that I'm something that was born and is going to die, and just those basic beliefs that everybody has. I mean, how do you get to be an adult without adopting those beliefs? but they're based on not knowing the truth about what we are. And so, you know, all the confrontational questioning to me, even though we may have to start and work in a psychological mode for a long time, is trying to get at beliefs that we have about what we are that may not be the truth.
Have you found that people do in confrontation, that people do get to questions of perhaps more subtle questions or deeper questions of identity and what really is the self, or what is permanent about the self? Do people get to that point?
Well, the people that I work with, I try to get them to the point where they don't have any solid ground to stand on. And so it's not a question of trying to get somebody to get a better belief about what they are. It's a question of trying to get them to realize they don't know it for sure what they are. Anything that they believe is going to be half the truth at best.
That sounds
So
like,
me, yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say that sounds like kind of a precarious position to put someone in,
Yeah,
especially if they're depressed.
yeah, yeah, you're right. Yeah,
You know, I'm teasing you a little bit, but I guess what you're getting back to, are you getting back to doubt and the power of doubt, or the importance
yes,
of doubt?
yeah, definitely. Hmm. Yeah, there's a question that somebody posed for the TAT forum reader commentary for the coming month, and it was about belief in God and stuff like that, and religion and belief in God or divine presence or something. And yeah, to me, religions that are based on trying to help somebody accept the truth about statements that are made are not particularly helpful for somebody who really wants to know what they are. And to me, what Richard Rose was talking about, and what a lot of the folks in TAT, especially those of us who had spent time around Rose, is we see the value of, you could say, respectful doubt. That it's almost a religion of doubt as opposed to a religion of belief. So definitely, that's what I'm working with people to try to encourage them to. But it's not just, it is not like trying to back them into a hopeless corner. So it's a question of trying to encourage people to get at a feeling level, but not just emotional feeling, but intuition, is to get their intuition to work on the problem of what they truly are. And you know, I think one way to look at it is everybody is trying to survive. And so survival is what's going to happen when we die? You know, is that the end of things? So one of the big selling points of enlightenment is, you know, the truth about what you are. And what I found out, and I think this is fairly common in people who've claimed to have found an answer about what they are, is that we find that what we are is not vulnerable in any sense. And so I tell that to people, but then, you know, almost everybody is convinced, oh, I'm affected by what I experience. And so by telling them, well, you know, I'm not, I know that what I am is not affected by what I experience, it gives them possibly, you know, a way to start doubting their own beliefs a little bit.
And since you've been doing confrontation, leading confrontation with groups of people since at least the 1990s?
The Middle Ages. Yeah. Let's see. I think the Pittsburgh group got started about 91, maybe something like that. Does that sound right? No, 97, I think, is when the Pittsburgh group got started. I mean, we did confrontation at the TAP meetings.
And so, and you do it today. So clearly this is something
Yeah.
that you believe is powerful and helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. I
And
think,
it's some,
one of the, hmm,
go
as I
ahead.
say, one of the advantages, like with the email confrontation groups where we have weekly exchanges, I think that if nothing else, it helps a person keep focused, or renewing focus on a fairly regular basis. You and I used to talk about with the TAP meetings 4 times a year. A lot of the times that people would come to the TAP meetings, it was like they were back to the
Right.
previous 3 months or whatever it had been.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think just that regular, any kind of a regular irritation or inspiration helps a person keep their head on the problem.
And that's the value of it being a group. If someone out there
Yes.
right now said, "Oh, that sounds kind of interesting," uh, would you
Mm-hmm.
recommend that they try to start something on their own? Could they start something on their
Oh, big
own?
time. Yeah. Sure. I encourage, especially once we know somebody a little bit, I definitely encourage them to try to get something going on their own local group. And now it's a little easier in some ways because people are doing Zoom groups and they don't have to find people locally necessarily.
And is it possible for you to give like 2 or 3 key pieces of advice or things to keep in mind if somebody said, yeah, I would like to start a group like that. How would I go about it?
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, the common response I get from somebody is, "Oh, I don't have anything to teach," and blah blah blah.
Right.
And so, yeah, I try to encourage them. It's not a question that they do have something to teach, and that's any convictions that they have. So it's not a question of trying to get somebody to believe them, but they can say, "Look, I've been looking into this for a while, and I have a conviction of X, Y, or Z." And so I think they do have something to get across. And it's so their conviction that there's some worthwhile activity that can occur is important. Yeah, but then the other thing is, I say, well, it's not. So Rose used to talk about what was it? Idiots, not idiots, but something anonymous.
Ignoramus.
I forget. Yeah, ignoramus is anonymous, wasn't that it? So yeah, it's not, you don't want to put yourself in a position of preaching stuff that you don't know. So it's not trying to sell beliefs, but it's trying to get together with other people and doing the work together of exploring their own mentalities.
In my little bit of experience running groups like that, one of the biggest challenges is people telling stories, uh,
Yeah.
and kind of and also secretly or subtly giving advice. Those are the two
Yeah.
things that I have
So I
seen.
have I have a long trail of people who've left meetings with me being disgruntled because I would just, if people were going off, and I'd encourage them to take a look at where the focus is in a meeting. So if they're trying to get attention, then I just point that out to them. If they're uh, telling stories rather than asking questions of the other people, I point that out to them and I say, that's fine from a friendship standpoint, but what we're trying to do here has a serious point. It's actually life and death serious. And so and some people take it okay. Sometimes I just say, look, I don't think you understand what we're trying to accomplish here, and would you just listen for a while instead of talk? And so that goes both ways. Sometimes they just get up and leave, and other times then they go along with it. So yeah, but the management of the meetings, I just try to really avoid all the unhelpful, unproductive activity that goes on.
And do you usually give people a question, or do you also leave it open, as in what's on your mind?
Yeah, so I've changed over the years. It used to be that I'd have a question, I'd uh, consider ahead of time. Now, what are the different ways people can respond to this question? And I'd have follow-up questions and stuff like that. But I, in recent years, I'm more apt to. Sometimes I'll have a little spiel that I'll do for a couple minutes, on something, and then I'll say, well, if you'd like to talk about this topic or theme or whatever, that's fine. I think it's better if you talk about whatever's been on your mind. And so I, you know, take a little bit of both.
If people want to, can they reach out to you for advice in terms of running a confrontation group? Is that something that you?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. And I can put them in touch with other people who are doing confrontation groups in different places around the country and around in Europe and places like that, who've had some exposure to what we're doing. And yeah, so they can actually find some other people who are in the same boat they are, trying to get things going.
Yeah, I I think that's an interesting point, and perhaps something unique about confrontation groups that I'm aware of is that they don't center around the teacher necessarily. So it's not
Right.
as if, oh, I got to get an arts confrontation group.
Yeah.
Um, have
I often tell people, the confrontation groups are better without a know-it-all,
hmm,
because then, yeah, so there's a big tendency, isn't there, for if you're around somebody that you think has the goods, then you want to try to somehow adopt their views and whatever. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a definite advantage to having the groups without any teacher.
and now that I think about it, there have been, I don't know if they were confrontation groups per se, but there have been groups of people who within the TAT sphere who were meeting,
Hmm.
and individuals from those groups have had awakenings, right?
Hmm. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for delving into that a little bit. It's something that I've thought, in a sense, that kind of group confrontation didn't play a particularly strong role for me in my search.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
Perhaps because of that comment that I gave you many years ago about don't confront me, I'm too depressed.
Yeah.
I'm confronting myself enough right now. I don't need any more doubt.
Yeah.
But I have looked from a distance and I've been impressed, obviously, and do think that there's a lot of value there for people to explore.
Hmm.
Um, kind of along the lines of, I think you mentioned mortality or immortality, um,
Yeah.
and I'm just curious if you want to talk about this at all. But I mean, you're getting older, and
Oh.
and has your view of what happens after death, or I'm kind of fishing around just to get a sense of, as you're getting older, do you feel closer to that perhaps a daily feeling of awakening or enlightenment, or maybe I'm asking, does the veil of Maya seem thinner as the years go by? Maybe that's a more elegant way to ask it.
Well, this is sort of may not be a direct answer, but I'll get started with this anyway. So what I notice is that I feel no need to check back to my source very often. And the only time I find that happening is every once in a while somebody will ask me a question, and I'll just get the feeling I don't want to give them an off-the-cuff answer. I want to touch back and see what comes out. And so I remember one time somebody asked Rose whether what he was close all the time, and he said no, it's closer at sometimes and further away at other times. Yeah, I don't have any need to ask myself about that. And so the only time I find that happening is when when there's a question that somebody asks me about. It probably doesn't happen more than a couple times a year. So in terms of, I had no feeling about whether, so I look around from where I am, there are 50,000 people live in this area. I heard a rumor there's like, I don't know what, 7 billion people on the planet now. I haven't seen all of them yet. But, I don't think that manifestation is liable to stop at any point, although it could. But so I figured, gee, I don't know how I got here this time. So I don't think that reincarnation is any more possible than incarnation. So I have no clue whether I'm going to be experiencing more stuff after this body croaks. But I expect it wouldn't be a surprise. So, but I don't feel that the veil is any different in terms of being thicker or thinner. It's just that, I see that this is a giant seeming here. It's not reality. And so I have this organism has a conviction that it's been exposed to what reality is. And but the rest of it to me is something there's no way I can know anything for sure about the relative cosmos. I don't think that answered your question very well. But.
Well, it helps me, and perhaps this is an illustration of confrontation in a way.
Yeah.
It helps me as I'm thinking, listening to your answer. It's helping me clarify the root of my question, and I think the root of my question is actually closer to. I've had the thought that aging of the human is perhaps a way of preparing the mind, the body, the soul, something, preparing it for leaving this place, because it seems like the body obviously is changing, and sometimes it's literally breaking down, and it's starting to come apart, and the mind as well.
I remember one time you told me all the dust in my house was from my body cells.
Yeah.
I never heard that before.
I don't complain about dust anymore because it's all from me. So
yeah.
It's no one to blame. So I guess a two-parter then. Do you feel that as people age, that perhaps there's an opportunity there for getting involved in a spiritual path, or maybe more of an opening for something happening to them as opposed when they were 25, because now they're 75, and it's obvious that at least the relative truth that this mechanism is not going to be around much longer is very apparent.
Mm-hmm. Boy, I don't know. So my experience with trying to use Meetup in order to let people know about local self-inquiry group meetings, it brings in some very nice people, but very few of them have any interest in self-realization or knowing what they are. And I don't know if that's just a lack of ability on my part to try to get something across, or I don't know, but so I don't see that aging is any. I agree that life is eroding the ego, right? So yeah, how can anybody live past, I don't know, 15 or 20 without having their ego eroded, and life continues to do that. But I don't see where that necessarily helps somebody focus on what the problem is. And so yeah, if their beliefs are getting challenged, then it's doing the job to some extent.
Yeah, I think that, at least in my mind, that the aging, the truth that it may be revealing, is countered by a diminishment of the energy behind the dynamic thinking that,
Mm-hmm.
at least to some degree, seems to be a part of realization.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of I always like to touch upon this question, in terms of what you see as the blocks or obstacles to people, what's your current view on the main blocks that people are up against?
But I don't have any general response that occurs to me. It seems like the people I work with, they all have their own set of views that they're holding on to for probably for a good practical reason, probably defensive reasons or whatever. But you stumped me.
Of those people that you're thinking about,
Yeah.
do the majority of them see the thing that they are holding on to and are unable to let go, or is it unknown to them?
Well, so one of the things that every few months, I get excited about trying to encourage people to make a written list of what they believe themselves to be or not to, what they are, what they aren't. And yeah, so generally, people will have some specific thing that they seem to be hung up on, like I'm my body. So, and they can hear some questions that try to shake that conviction, but and some of them are spending a lot of time looking, and trying to question their beliefs and things like that. But they get a seemingly like a block where they can't imagine that what they believe isn't the truth. So, and even like the idea of working with a paradigm. So Richard Rose advised using a paradigm of the view is not the viewer. And so for some people, they can, it's like a what if game, isn't it? That you can, if you believe in the logic of the excluded middle, that in this dimension, nothing can be itself and not itself at the same time. So you can't be both up and down at the same time. You can either be up or you can be down, but you can't be both. And so using a paradigm like the view is not the viewer can be very helpful for some people, but for other people, they have some way to try to see past that. They get so I complain a little bit about a lot of non-dual teaching, which to me is a lot of it is just trying to sell beliefs as opposed to getting people to really question and find the truth for themselves. And so I think some folks are really serious seekers. They get the idea that no, the view may be the viewer, it's all one or whatever. And so they don't, there's some missing intuition or logic or some combination of the two that gets them stuck in a corner, and they can't seem to, some surprise evidence would have to question those beliefs.
Do you find, this is something that I don't think I've ever talked with you much about, but in terms of meditation, is meditation a solo confrontation exercise? Is that how you view meditation, or is it something else?
Well, so I was not a very inventive seeker. And so the meditation technique that Rose described in the Psychology of the Observer, that made more sense to me than anything other than I'd come across. I tried a few other things, but so that was basically my meditation practice for 25 years. And what it was just reminding myself of what I was looking for, and then turning my head away from anything that was running through the thought stream that didn't seem to be relevant. And I had no idea whether that was helpful or harmful or whatever, what any causal relationship might have been. But I have the feeling that sort of built a muscle, so that when in the final hour before my breakthrough, when what I saw by looking back at what I was looking out from, I felt like I didn't want to, but I felt like I couldn't have turned my head away from that if I had wanted to. And so I'm suspicious that what my meditation practice was built a muscle that kept my focus on the final evidence that triggered the breakthrough for me. If somebody has a conviction of some meditation practice that they're trying, I don't argue with it. I think, gee, that may be exactly what they need.
Got you. That's what I was curious about. If, since you had this particular practice, if you advised people do the same.
I try to be honest with. So, I tell people all the time, I think the two biggest mistakes teachers make. One is assuming that they can look back at their life and pick out things that were instrumental, and other things that could just be ignored. And then the second was, even worse, is telling somebody else, well, look, this is what worked for me. If you do it, it'll work for you. I'm getting a message here. It says upgrade, new drivers downloaded.
You should do that right now.
Anything across your screen? Let me get rid of this if I can.
No, I'm not seeing it on this end, so I don't think it's interfering with the recording. Other than distracting us.
It's got half of my head and half of your head. That's okay.
Well, that last comment that you made, it brings to mind your books to me, because from my perspective, the Solid Ground of Being book, the Beyond Relativity, in your new book, Sense of Self, all three of those books, they don't strike me as books of instruction. They strike me as more sharing of your experience, but then you also wrap in the experience of a lot of different seekers in those books. And is that something that you did on purpose?
Yeah. So I guess it's material that interests me, and I figure that somebody who could get something out of it would share some of the same biases or whatever you might say. So I like to, a lot of the books, the material is question and answer exchanges. And to me, that's what I'm interested in. So I think that hopefully would be of interest to somebody else. That So I also think another one of what happens sometimes in the confrontation groups is that the best questions that hit people are ones that somebody's asking somebody else. It's like like the defensive shield isn't up and something gets through from another angle. And so I get the same feeling about if somebody sees or hears a question and answer exchange, that it may get something through that wouldn't hit if if they were being asked it directly.
Yeah, I can really relate to that. Listening to
Mhm.
other people and almost feeling what they're experiencing in the moment, and that really affected me.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, that beyond, let's say, beyond confrontation, meditation practice, are there other suggestions that you would give to people about things to do?
Well, yeah. So one of the things that needs to happen somehow is a triangulation away from personality, and also a triangulation away from individuality. And so the idea of self versus other. If our focus is entirely on self, we're going to be restricted. If it's entirely, so for years, my focus was mainly on other, doing the confrontation groups and all that kind of stuff. And so I think again, it comes down to an individual case. You almost have to see for an individual where their focus is. And generally, the pendulum swings too far in one direction. And so if a person's completely focused on themselves, then my recommendation would be find others to work with. And if they're lost in working with others and aren't focusing on themselves, then I'd try to get the pendulum to swing back in the other direction a little bit.
And that brings to mind the common complaint that I hear, or common observation that I hear, and maybe it's the set of data is contaminated by the question of, well, I feel stuck. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And well, that's when
Yeah.
people show up at the doors, because they feel stuck and they don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In those situations, do you have any suggestions on how people can on their own become unstuck? Or is that again just a really individual thing, or something that does require another person and outside influence?
Yeah, geez. So if the stuckness is a conviction state, then some like shock or trauma has to happen to exchange that conviction state for a new conviction state. So yeah, so one of the things that would do that for me was solitary retreats. And so that's something I always encourage people to try if they haven't, or if they haven't done one recently, to do solitary retreats. There was one time when I was living in Texas at the time, and at that point I was changing jobs about every year because I was doing a month solitary retreat most years, and wasn't good for longevity in the jobs. And so I had come up to the farm to do, I think it was November, it was cold, it had been raining, the farm, everything was muddy. The trees, the deciduous trees were ugly, you know. And for about 6 months before that, I had my state of mind. So generally, I thought of myself as a somewhat optimistic, you know, not wildly optimistic, but you know, a little bit optimistic. And for the 6 months, say before that, I'd sort of been in a state of mind where things just didn't seem so hopeful. And when I started the retreat, I fasted for the first 3 days. There wasn't, of course, there wasn't any electricity or any plumbing. I was in a little cabin out in the woods, and there was a small wood stove, but I didn't have any implements for cutting down trees or cutting down tree branches. And so I was picking up wet twigs from the ground, and they smolder a little bit. So there was no heat, you know, no light, no nothing. And on the third or fourth morning, when I went out to pee in the morning, all of a sudden the mud was beautiful, the deciduous trees were beautiful, and anything was possible. So I thought, wow. So, and basically that's the only way we see a conviction state, is in contrast. When something changes, then you get a contrast. And so I remember talking to Mr. Rose about that afterwards. He says, yes, that's the value of fasting, is it shocks the mind. You may get a change in conviction state. So solitary retreats and experimenting with things like fasting, to me, I encourage people to do all those, especially if they're feeling stuck.
is there a value to the more leaning towards the ascetic side on one solitary retreat as opposed to what might be the resort side of that experience?
I'll tell you, with one exception, my solitary retreats were all high points of my life. The exception was when our friend Bob Sergel finally convinced me to use his cabin for a solitary retreat. His cabin had electricity. It didn't have plumbing, but it had electricity, and it had comfortable furniture. And that retreat was nothing happened. So yes, I'm for myself, because I was in still am interested in comfort, you know. So that lack of the discomfort was extremely effective for me.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would, at least in the hypothetical, I would think, well, wouldn't I want things to be as easy as possible so I can just relax and maybe I'll make contact with God.
Maybe, I guess, you know, people need to experiment with that, don't they? So for me, I also found out that when I didn't take any, so there wasn't any internet or anything, but if I took a book that I hadn't read before, that would be a nice distraction. But after the first couple of retreats, I didn't do that anymore. And so my initial fasting and then not having any distraction, any reading or anything like that, I would get super, super, super bored. And when I did, important things would start popping up in my mind that didn't happen when I was just at home by myself, even if I was doing, you know, like a solitary retreat, if I was home by myself. Yeah, so that combination of the discomfort from the fasting and the letting the mind get really bored was, oh my gosh, what a difference that made for me. I'd find myself smiling to myself, which I never did when I was by myself. And it would be like champagne bubbling in my bloodstream. It was a miracle. Yeah. So, but those are things people have to experiment with themselves, don't they? You can't set up a scenario like that and expect it's going to be replicatable, whatever.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It reminds me of Franklin Merrill Wolff saying how important that individualized path was.
Yeah.
I think he said something along the lines of, you have to do that. You have to make the practices your own. You've got to modify them in some way.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, I mean, in a way it's obviously very different from a tradition, which would encourage
definitely
all of us to do a certain practice in a certain way, and perhaps even a certain time. And there's an appeal to that tradition, because it kind of takes some of the work out of, I got to figure this out myself.
Sure. Yeah. I also have the bias that if somebody finds a meditation technique that they like, then it's just going to be like a rest break, you know?
Oh, so that's interesting.
My meditation was a slog. I think there were only 2 times in 25 years where I found myself actually meditating when it wasn't my morning hour that I had reserved for sitting meditation. It was so wonderful, but my sitting meditations were a slog. There was nothing pleasurable about them at all.
Well, let me ask you about that theme a little bit of slogging, because that's something I'm very familiar with. And
that was my main strategy.
Yeah, you and I share that quality of getting things done by slogging through them. Have you thought, or have you had the experience of asking yourself, well, how do I know when it's time to change my approach? I've been slogging at this, and it always.
I use your advice about that. I use your advice, which is don't drop something that you're working on until you have something that appeals to you as possibly more productive. Yeah,
Mm,
so I never found anything that was seemed more appealing or more productive.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, so we touched upon confrontation, we touched upon meditation, we touched upon isolation,
Yeah.
spending time alone. Is there anything else that you would consider, from a high level view, something that is worth experimenting with?
Well, I think Gurdjieff had some good ideas about exercises that get us out of our comfort zone. And those are something that people can play with a little bit. But yeah, so challenging ourselves, there's a challenge that we can do, say, mentally when we're meditating, of trying to ask ourselves a question. But I think there's a lot more, a lot more latitude that can be used for challenging ourselves. I've also heard people that I know or have known pretty well say that they got great value out of things like, I'm trying to think, Byron Katie. Byron Katie exercises where she'd send them out to make fools of themselves in the local park or whatever. And so, yeah, so anything like that that provides shocks to us can be helpful.
That reminds me of, I think it was Rose who gave the suggestion that you shouldn't stay at a job longer than a year because you get
Oh,
into a rut,
yeah,
mental rut.
yeah, yeah, sure, yeah.
Hmm.
One of the things that I found is after I made a commitment to become the truth, basically were the words I borrowed from Rose for what made sense to me. I never, ever had any interest in where I was going to live next, what job I was going to do next. All that stuff just took care of itself. It was amazing to me. All those things that I used to think I had to work, that all those secondary things just took care of themselves. And magic would happen. Like I'd I'd be down to the last 2 nickels, and I'd move to a new city, and I'd see an ad again, before the internet days, I'd see an ad in say the Sunday paper for a job, and I'd call and I'd talk to somebody who wasn't the person who was going to be doing the hiring, but as soon as the phone connection was made, I knew I had the job. I mean, just things like that were happening all the time.
I know that Douglas Harding played a role in your spiritual path. Are his
Yeah.
exercises something that you utilize with other people? Do you ever do workshops?
I encourage, so like it, like at our weekend or weekly retreats, I encourage people to provoke each other with those kinds of things. I don't know if I would have gotten much out of the exercises other than, so when you had recommended going to a workshop that Douglas Harding was going to be doing in New Jersey. I think it was at Princeton. And that was the year that he'd taken a fall, and the doctor told him no more transatlantic flights. And so he canceled that meeting. And so I could have gone to one of his workshops. I wanted to meet him. I could have gone to one of his workshops over in Europe. And, but actually I didn't really want to go to one of his workshops. So I just emailed him and said, can I come over and see you? And to me, when he said yes, I thought, this is like Rose. The real teachers, I think, are accessible. They're not working with 1 million people, And so what he did so I actually made 2 trips over there. The second one I wasn't planning to go back so soon, but he and his wife were just so encouraging and wanted me to, we felt like we were family. Honestly, God, it was quite amazing. And a couple of the guys in the Pittsburgh self-inquiry group wanted to meet Harding. And so I asked whether they could come over, and I didn't get a response. And so I figured, okay, the next time that, when I didn't hear back from him, I said, how about if I come over? And so then got a big invitation, So, but Harding, both times when I was there on the Sunday of the week or whatever I was there, he would get some of his local students together and they'd put on a workshop. And I felt a little embarrassed about that they do that for me, and I wouldn't actually put myself up and go to one of their workshops. Yeah, so yeah, and I think a lot of the exercises that he came up with, it gets, if a person is not in touch with their inner child, whatever that is, they're basically that kind of a feeling level that you have to drop all your sophisticated ideas in order to get the other side of the picture. So yeah, so I was immensely affected by when Harding did his tube experiment with me, one of those meetings. So for 24 years, I've been working in the rose paradigm of the view is the view is outside, and what I'm looking for is inside, that inside-outside paradigm. With Harding and the tube experiment, I saw very clearly that what was in the view was inside me. And so then my mind had two opposing ways of looking at the world, you could say, that I couldn't see that either one was more valid than the other. And the mind is not like that. That's iffy territory. Yeah, and to me, that was the great value that working with Harding provided, was being shaken, one of those core paradigms being shaken.
And the decision to go see him, was that a intuition for you, or was it more of a logical, or was it just what the heck, I might as well?
Well, I think it was basically because I admired you, and you said that you had been to one of his workshops and you thought it might be valuable for me. Mm-hmm. And so I wasn't finding anything that I thought was very valuable for me. So yeah, so I don't think, I wouldn't really say it was 100% intuitional. I think there was some combination of things,
I mean, I didn't suggest that you fly transatlantic to go see
No,
him.
No, you suggested going to the New Jersey workshop.
Yeah, that's a little different.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Uh-huh.
I was trying to get a sense, because something I've wanted to ask you about for years. I don't know if you remember, but I remember that there was a period of time where you were getting a lot of books of art and paintings and so forth from the library.
Yeah.
And really spending time with those. And I really didn't know what you were doing, because that was very far away from what I was doing at the time.
Also, and also listening to music, which I from the time I was a kid, I liked to make noise, but I was never one into listening to other people make musical noise. And so what happened is, I was living in Miami at the time. I'd gone to the farm, Rose Farm, for a solitary retreat. And when I got back, I did my usual thing of writing a 6-page letter or whatever to Mr. Rose saying, here's every thought I had during the month on the farm, and here's 1,000 questions and whatever. And he would always respond. Usually what he'd do is he'd ask me to number the questions, and then his response would be 3, and then something, and 19 and something. So he'd pick the things that weren't too annoying, I suppose. But I didn't hear back from him. So I figured all the stuff got lost in the mail. I also sent him some clippings that I knew he was interested in. And when I didn't hear back from him, after a couple of weeks, back then I had a word processor. It was before the PCs, but a word processor. So I had a digital record of what I put together. So I printed it out and sent it again. And again, I didn't hear back from him. And when I didn't, I hadn't seen my conviction, my intuition process at work back then. And I never considered myself as being very intuitional, but I got hit with a strong conviction that, well, Rose has given up on me, so everything's hopeless. And shortly after that, the last one of the younger fellows who'd been living on the farm left the farm, and I knew that. So to me, it was a wonderful place to be able to go for solitary retreats, in addition to the tap meetings, obviously. But so I called Richard Rose and I said, I don't have any reason I have to be here in Miami versus someplace else. How about if I come up there and we can keep the farm open for solitary retreats? He said, sure, yeah, come on up. So for that next half a dozen years, and you probably remember this because we were friendly there at that time, and I'd lost my hope in terms of anything for myself, but I still, since self-inquiry and self-realization were the primary value in my life, I figured, well, if I can do anything to help somebody else, that'll be something. And so about after 5 or 6 years, I got the feeling I need to look for beauty. And that's what got me to the library. Getting the books of paintings and sculpture were the two things that did it for me for some reason. So like Rodin's sculpture would do it, and paintings by some of the, I don't know which ones, but some of the classical painters, whatever. Usually the colorful one, like Rubens, for example, the beautiful rich colors and things like that. And the other thing I did is I started listening to classical music, Bach and Beethoven, and I don't think in my life I'd ever lay down on the floor and just listen to music. And so that's what I was doing. That was toward the end of my spa treatment for getting the most value out of depression.
Can you put a finger on something that you gained from doing that, from that exploration?
Yeah. Well, from the whole depression really was, I was functional, but I was spending most of my time just sitting in a room in a chair, and I'd look out the window in my little house and I'd see a hornet's nest building under the awning. And I think I probably ought to go do something about that. And any suggestion that came into my mind about doing something, the next thing that would hit my mind was, oh, it's just too much effort. So, but because of not doing much of anything, other than mowing at the farm and things like that, my thoughts were it was almost like a sensory deprivation tank where thoughts slow down and you see things in more detail. So, yeah, so I think there was a lot of value. And also at that time, I think I was getting most of my life lessons through dreams. I'd started recording dreams, and I kept a dream journal, and I'd make notes. And so I learned how to make notes at night without turning my light on. I convinced myself I could see through my closed eyelids in the dark to make notes. Then I'd look at them in the morning. Of course, they were just scratches. But yeah, so I actually I think it was a valuable time. I don't think it would have needed to last for 7 years, but so I don't. What finally brought me out of it was, so I also had the situation where I had gotten my mother to move from New York down to Florida with me, and then I brought her back up to West Virginia when I moved to West Virginia. She was at a point where she wasn't taking good care of herself, and she wasn't very open to having people come in and help her. She wouldn't be too cooperative with them. So I felt like I had to see her every day. I didn't do any solitary retreats during that half a dozen years. And toward the end of that period, she got to the point where she had to go into a nursing home. And when that happened, then I did my first solitary retreat in 6 or 7 years, and had what I call an acceptance experience there. A lot of strange stuff was happening that before the retreat, and that led into it. It was like a bigger intelligence setting things up for me. And so that broke my depression. That's when I started going up to Pittsburgh and getting a group started up there. So yeah, so I don't discount the value of it, but I also think I probably indulge a little too much in self-pity It could have gotten over in a year or two rather than 6 or 7.
Do you think that the time that you spent looking at the sculpture and the paintings, was that well, I'm trying to get a sense of, did you feel something? Did you get some feedback from that experiment that kept pulling you forward? Or was it just kind of well, it was interesting.
Well, I think it was my intuition had picked up on the fact that my focus had been on, you could say, ugliness. It wasn't really ugliness, but when I got the strong conviction to start looking for beauty, I think that started infusing the mind with new data. So, yeah, I don't see any particular. I don't remember any particular, say, insight or recalculation that happened, but I think it was part of that whole process of coming out of the depression, the hopelessness.
So you and I both know.
Because, yeah, in fact, I was going to say before that, the whole, whenever a little glimmer of hope would occur in my mind, it was too painful. I had to turn away from it. And so I think that looking for beauty was also a way to get past that.
Well, the comment that you just made about it was too painful to look for hope.
Yeah.
That brings to mind a friend that we both know who I was just listening to a recording recently, and he made a comment almost like that he hoped that he wouldn't experience hope because the loss of it was so painful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He would just rather not see it. And along that line, then, as we both know, people who have struggled with depression and some who have succumbed to depression.
Yeah.
Do you have any sense that, or any thought, I'll just say, do you have any thoughts along the lines of this idea of, I think Rose once said, well, when in a depressed state of mind, we may be closer to seeing the truth of things than at any other time. And yet, it seems to be countered by depressions which lead to suicide or lead to years of inaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not really a question from me in there. I'm just more curious what you think about that. The value of depression versus the danger of depression. Maybe that's what I'm getting at.
Well, depression is obviously not something we can talk ourselves out of, is it? And so among our friends that I know have struggled with depression, it has a different flavor for different people. Like one of them, when he would go through the cycles of being extra depressed, his conviction was things can only get worse from here. And to me, I never had that conviction. But so to me, the conviction he had was, oh my God, how would anybody survive that? And I don't know what the solution would be, honest to God. Yeah.
I can tell my questions always want to run towards advice and suggestion.
Yeah.
How can you, what could you say that might help someone? I'll go ahead and ask it anyway.
Okay.
In regards to depression, if I find myself in a depressed state, should I look to get out of it as soon as I can? Should I look to change that state? Because, if you get around other people, if you do something totally different, if you give a shock earlier, you mentioned shocks to the system to
Yeah,
break you out of
yeah,
these moods.
yeah, sure. Something you do might provide a shock, like even just a change of scenery might do it.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Should I
yeah.
try to employ levers like that, or should I maybe say, well, let me stick in this a little bit and see what kind of thoughts I have in this state? And,
No, I can't imagine anybody. No, yeah, to me that would be like masochistic. So yeah, I would think that if anybody who's depressed has, you could say, the inspiration to try to do something about it. Yeah, definitely. Although recently, a friend who's had a lot of trouble with depression, we had a long phone call, and he was telling me about what he's been doing and something new he was trying. And I said, well, I'm glad to hear you're still trying things. And he started crying. So, geez, you know, it's hard to tell what is going to be helpful and what's not going to be, in terms of like advice, or in terms of, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Do you find, as time has gone by, you've been in the role of what people would call a teacher or advisor
Yeah,
or friend for some
yeah.
time now? Have you
Mhm.
found that you give less advice as the years go by?
Gosh, it comes down to interacting with individuals. Yeah, some individuals I still give advice to, and some I don't, or I'd be reluctant to. Yeah, and that might be different times too. Just depending on, I don't know what combination of factors, but
Yeah,
so the
yeah,
thing, the down. So if somebody's in a strong position and you give them advice and it doesn't work, then they've got somebody they can let themselves off the hook with, right? Oh yeah, I tried this, but it didn't work. So if they're cooking it up for themselves, then they're going to have to be more honest about what's going on, I think. So that so yeah, so somebody who's in a strong position, generally I'd be less uh, likely to try to give them advice on what to do or not to do. And somebody who's in a weak position, then I just keep my fingers crossed that I'm going to be more helpful than harmful.
yeah. As you look across the landscape of spiritual practices today, spiritual teachers,
Mm-hmm.
there's a tremendous variety of things that are out there,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah.
Are there any teachers that catch your eye as, oh, this is actually somebody who's kind of interesting, and maybe I'd like to explore, I'd like to have a conversation with them, or they seem intriguing to me, or does everything just look like BS?
Yeah. Let me see what I should say about that.
Well,
I'm,
I framed it in the positive. I didn't say,
yeah, yeah.
who
Uh-huh.
who looks like BS out there. I said, who looks intriguing to you?
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah, not really. I'm intrigued by seekers as opposed to teachers.
Hmm.
Mhm. And so, if a seeker is attracted to a particular teacher, I figure that may be exactly what they need. You know, regardless of whether I think the teacher has the goods or not.
Yeah, yeah. Are
Yeah.
there any particular books that you point people to, or is that very individualized?
Well, it's pretty individualized. Yeah. Yeah. So usually the books people ask me about are like Richard Rose books. And so generally the two that ended up being my desert island books, the Carillon, which was mainly poetry, and then the Psychology of the Observer. I if I think the person has the I try to get a feeling for what I think might be most helpful. So usually for Richard Rose's books, I advise starting with something like the direct mind experience, which is not as dense as the Psychology Observer, for example. But if it's somebody who's primarily intellectual, I'd encourage them to take a look at Carillon, because that was a side of Rose that was so different from a lot of his talks and writings and things like that, but it can touch very, very deeply.
Yeah, I was
Yeah, in
thinking when
terms of
you
other,
go ahead.
oh, no, go ahead and what you were going to say.
Oh, I was just going to say, I was thinking when you named Psychology of the Observer and Carillon, how,
Mm-hmm.
diametrically opposed in terms of
Yeah,
the material.
definitely.
Intriguing choice.
Uh-huh. Yeah, with Psychology Observer, for all 25 years when I was reading it, I was trying to understand it, which I couldn't do. So, and with Caroline, my mentality wasn't trying to understand it; it was trying to feel it.
That reminded me of sitting with Mr. Rose and looking at Carillon with him, and he, I think he was looking at the essay Tales of Love, or the short story Tales of Love that's in Carillon.
Yeah.
And he said something to the effect of, you don't have any idea of what this is about. Said that to me. You don't
Yeah.
understand what this is about. And in retrospect, the theme of Tales of Love is very far from
Yeah.
anything I was
Yeah.
capable of intuiting or feeling at that point in time.
Uh-huh.
But the beauty of those books is that you can go back to them, and every time you look at them,
Yeah.
you get something new.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you, in your mind, is meditation different from what Rose was talking about when he said to go within? And, critical piece of advice of go within and employ
Yeah.
whatever means
Yeah. Yeah.
necessary. Is that different
Right.
from meditation?
Meditation or mentation? Meditation.
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 Yeah.
Well, yeah, it depends on what we're talking about with meditation, right? So, to me, meditation is, you could say it's watching the mind. So, from that standpoint, I think they're the same. That by watching the mind, by watching what's going on in the mind, you get information that challenges your beliefs about what you are. So, in retrospect, to me, that's what going within is. It's the accidents that happen when you're watching the mind and you see something that, like, with my mentality, I seem to have had to see things in slow motion. So one of my either the first or second solitary retreat I ever did, I was stopped in my tracks on a walk in West Virginia along a dirt road, and I saw the decision-making process going in slow motion. And when I saw that, that was all the data I needed to convince myself I wasn't doing it. It was going by itself, And so for 25 years, going within was a koan for me. I didn't really know what Rose was talking about. But in retrospect, I think those are the kinds of accidents that get us inward. It changes our view by just watching things, and then you see something, and it's like they're different viewing platforms that the things are being watched from. And
Do you distinguish between feeling and thought?
Well, I use thought in a general sense. It includes pictures and words and emotions and, you know, the thought stream. But then, yeah, so then feelings are like a subset, I would say, of thought. So I don't think of thought just as worded thought.
Okay. And I was just trying to clarify that. So when you are talking about
Uh-huh.
observing thought, you are talking about observing as well, or maybe let's say I have a feeling of joy that
Well,
comes
yes,
up.
I think the term I used was observing the mind, right? Not observing thought,
I
watching
actually
the
don't
mind.
know. I'd have to review the recording. And
Well,
well, I'll go with what you just
edit it,
said.
edit it along those terms.
Yeah. So observing the mind then is
Yeah,
encompassing,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
encompassing
So
all
all the
phenomena.
yeah, and so as you know, you start seeing things besides the thought stream. You start seeing processes that are actually working in the mind.
And
Yeah,
a process meaning, can you explain
yeah,
that a little more?
like a program that's running. So the first one I saw was the decision making process, and I was watching, like you could say, machinery. It wasn't very sophisticated either. It was a bunch of idiots all trying to elbow their way into the spotlight, the fears and desires. Yeah. So that was the first, what I'd say is a process that I witnessed that was running in the mind. And then that first solitary retreat I did after my mother went into nursing home. Uh, as soon as I got into the retreat, I made a list of things that I didn't have any plan to do. I just made a list of like painful memories that I had, and I watched my mentality go into like a turbo drive mode. And I thought, wow, I've never seen this before. It's like it was processing a tremendous amount of information that I could get bits and pieces of, but way faster and whatever than typical. I saw that happen several times over a couple of years or three, I don't know how many years, but eventually that dawned on me, that's what I think of as intuition. There's actually a intuition process or program running in the mind that is, it basically seems to use the whole database of my life experience, everything I've read, everything I've, come across in any form. And it goes through a horrendous amount of data trying to solve whatever problem is on its plate. And these days, I distinguish that from the sixth sense, or what I call psychic stuff, which is stuff coming into the mind directly from another channel. When I saw the thought process in slow motion one time, I saw wherever I was watching a stream of thought, there was like a Janus, a two-headed observer there that could look back and see the percept that hit the mind that started that pattern of reactions that became that thought stream. And there were two pipes or two channels where stuff was coming into, the percepts were coming into the mind. And one was all the things, the five senses. But there was another channel that I didn't know what it was. So that's what I assume when people say sixth sense, that's what they're talking about. And to me, there's some material that hits the mind just out of nowhere that comes in on that on that second pipe or that other channel. And then there's the mental process of intuition, which is seemingly much more sophisticated than the decision-making process. It's not an emotional process. It processes emotions and thoughts and everything, but it's not emotional at the base. Rose referred to it as refined feeling. And to me, that's so. Sometimes some conviction has hit the mind, which I didn't see the background processing going, so I didn't know whether it was coming in from this other channel or whether it was coming out of the intuition program that was running in the mind. And other times I would spot intuition at work and watch it until it came up with a conclusion, which would be very quiet. It wasn't making a lot of noise.
And those are everything that you just described would be a process, what you would call processes in the mind.
Yeah, yeah, uh-huh. Yeah.
And
It's like watching machinery running, like working with a computer where you got a program running.
yeah, and this is a favorite topic of mine when we start talking about going within.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sure that you talked about this before, but uh, I'm assuming that you got to the point of having some sense of I am watching this.
Well,
Is
to
that
me, that sense was very annoying because it was sitting on the fence between being a subject and an object. So it was like that's me. I'm what's looking at the computer. But as soon as I recognize it, then it becomes an object in my consciousness. So I could never, the sense of self was annoying as hell because I couldn't get my arms around it. So it was subjective in terms of it's close as I could see to what was me, but I couldn't see anything about it. So I think like Harding's exercises, basically what he's doing is you look back at what you're looking out from and you don't see anything, right? Well, isn't it a big open space? Isn't it, this, isn't it that? So it's like he's, I can't think of the right word for it, but it's like a hypnotic suggestion.
mm,
So to me, when I was looking for years, when I would look back at what I was looking out from and I didn't see anything, I thought, well, that makes, if there's no movement, no noise, it's representing death. And so I don't want to go back there. It's like a revolving door. You could say it's like, you're in a revolving door. You can go in to the department store or you can go back out on the street. And so the department store is the familiar territory of the mind. And if you went back out, that's nowhere. It's, there's nothing there. So I think to me, that's why you can't, the mind self can't just take a stroll back there, that something has to occur. And what occurred for me in the final solitary retreat I had was I became conscious of awareness. And that provided the data that brought the keystone of my arch of beliefs about what I was into conflict.
and the trying to give people a feel maybe of what were you pursuing, or what were you after, or what was your sense of I want to go do a retreat? What led you to that retreat that led to this revelation?
Yeah. Well, so I had reserved a cabin at the Listening Point Retreat Center, which is a Franciscan monastery on Lake Erie in Pennsylvania, and they were all booked up. So in like January, I registered, or whatever you call it, reserved a cabin for a week in May. And that February, I was over seeing Harding for the second visit. And on the trip back from Harding's, the mood descended on me that I want to get more serious than I've ever been in my life before. I don't know who to blame for that mood, but I assume it had something to do with being around Harding. And I remember crossing my mental fingers saying, I hope this mood stays around for May, for when I'm on my solitary retreat. And it did. But in retrospect, I think that's the stupidest decision I ever made in my life, to postpone doing something for 3 months, when that mood descended. Yeah. And so in that in that final solitary retreat for the 2 or 3 days, the word open sesame would hit my consciousness, come into my consciousness. And whenever that did, I found myself looking back at what I was looking out from. I wasn't trying to do it. It was just something that was going on, which always amazed me and impressed me, because not much seemed to happen that way. Most of it seemed to be all struggle.
So it sounds then like you didn't go into the retreat with something, an idea in mind of, I really want to look at X. It was more,
No.
I want to get serious, and serious feels like going into the retreat will allow that to happen.
Yeah.
And what happened in the retreat itself, it sounds more like those were intuitions that were coming to you, and you were following those intuitions. Is that correct?
Well, so after 3 days of fasting, for the next 2 or 3 days, I'd taken a Harding book along with me. It was the Little Book of Life and Death. And I think it was like in the introduction or the prologue or something like that, there was a series of tests for immortality. And for 2 or 3 days, I went through those. And what I was doing is I'd read as much of a sentence as, some little piece of a sentence. I say, now, can I see this for myself? So I was actually checking my intuition, what I could see intuitively. And I wouldn't go past a point where I couldn't see it for myself. In retrospect, I figure that's when I became my own authority. I don't think I'd ever done that before. And so I did that for 2 or 3 days. And then I was at the end of the retreat. It was a Sunday, and I was right across the road from Lake Erie, and I had wanted to see the sun setting on Lake Erie, but I decided to wait and keep it for the last night. And so that last evening of the retreat, I went over to watch the sunset on the lake, and I went back to the cabin I was staying in. I sat in the chair, and I realized for maybe the second or third time in my life, I was just sitting doing nothing. I always felt I had to keep busy, my mind busy. So I was just sitting doing nothing, which was wonderful. And that's when things started happening. So also I've come to the conclusion that that combination of effort followed by relaxation can be very, very magical or productive.
Yeah, that reminds me about my joke earlier about the retreat at the resort. The resort retreat versus the ascetic retreat.
Yeah.
Well, Art, do you have plans for the next 15 years when we do? We'll do another interview 15 years from now. Do you have any plans for the next 15 years, or is it kind of, do you see yourself continuing to do what you're doing now?
Yeah, I don't see myself doing anything other than what I'm doing now. It may develop, I don't know. Yeah, but I'm not really planning to stick around for another 15 years. I think that's asking a lot of me.
Well, Harding stayed around, and
Oh my God, he did. Yeah, he was a trooper, wasn't he?
Yeah, fiery until the end, as far as I know.
I know he was. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to, remind people again that you've got 3 books out now: Solid Ground of Being, Beyond Relativity, and Sense of Self, which they can pick up at Amazon or order through the local bookstores. If people want to reach you, are you open to random people contacting you? Do you respond to that kind of thing, or? No, I have not. I'm going to
I,
shine for
I,
that.
I respond to email. I discourage phone calls unless people are really hurting. You know what I mean? And uh, I suppose I'm going to be doing more Zoom stuff, but I don't see doing it individually. So for virtual meetings, that kind of thing, maybe. But yeah, so I'm open if somebody wants to email me.
And selfdiscoveryportal.com. Did I get that right? That's your
Yes,
website, and your email,
yes,
your
yeah,
contact info's there.
yes, it is. Yeah,
All right, great.
or they
Great.
can always call you and ask.
Well, yeah, I guess well, I tend to kind of hide my contact info a little bit.
Yeah,
You have to dig around a little bit to find how to reach me. I think that's it. Art, if there's any final thoughts that you have before we sign off.
I encourage people to keep slogging, keep doing what they're doing, or keep looking for new things, different things to do. But the longing that we have, the yearning or the longing that we have, is trying to get a message through to us. And the more we're conscious, the more we feel that longing, the more our body and mind will react to it and try to do something to satisfy it.
Thank you, Art.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you for listening to this edition of Journals of Spiritual Discovery. I'm your host, Sean Nevins. For more information about today's guest, as well as more interviews, books, and other resources, go to spiritualteachers.org. That's spiritualteachers.org.